Kiburu, and I'm very excited to be here today. I am Kenyan, and I currently live in Sweden, and it's my first time in Australia. So a big thank you to the organizers. Thank you. And a big thank you to the organizers who've been very supportive and generous with information as I prepare to come to this conference. So I am a senior developer advocate at Spotify. My team works on something we call Spotify for Developers, and I'll take time to talk to you about that a little bit later. I have a little Easter egg, and it's this scannable code. So if you have Spotify, the app, you just need to click on your search bar, and you'll find a camera icon. And if you use that to scan this code, then you'll find something interesting in there. And for anyone who doesn't have Spotify, I have a screenshot of what that is at the end of my presentation. So hang tight. All right, so my talk today is titled A's for A+, Scaling Best Practices in API Design. And as you can see, we have some ways before we get to the scaling best practices part, but there's a method to the madness, so stay with me. One of the things I wanted to do for this session is to borrow from things I draw a lot of inspiration from, and things that I have found in the real world scale really well. So things like art, literature, culture, and language have the potential to scale and have scaled for generations. And so there's a lot that we can borrow from all of that and observing all of that in API design. All right, so art, let's start. So this is one of my favorite illustrations, and I tried to trace it back to its original creator. And the earliest version of it I could find was from an 1892 edition of a German humor magazine. And we're already leading the witness in my slide, but depending on where you're at, you saw the duck first, and then you saw the rabbit, or vice versa. And this is really interesting because art does this thing where it can be interpreted in any form, and there's no wrong or right answer. And whatever interpretation you carry with you, you're able to share that. And in that way, it scales, right? Like people share it far and wide, they print it, they hang it in their houses. And so that's a really good example of, a place we can draw inspiration from as we think about APIs and how we design them and the people that will use them. The other thing I want to draw inspiration from is culture. I said I'm from Kenya, which is one of the 54 countries in Africa. My country alone has 44 or 45 languages. And so if there was an average of 30 languages in the 54 countries, you can imagine how many languages are in the continent. But then someone shared that screen grab on socials recently, and I really liked it because it encapsulated this complexity that language has, and how 2 letters of the alphabet can be used in a very versatile way, and in a way that cultures across the continent agree on. And so I don't have time to enunciate all of this, but like if someone was saying no to you, the universal understanding of it is and if someone was saying what to you, they will say and there's all these other ones that YouTubers and TikTokers everywhere have articulated, so you can go and find how people, express this using just 2 letters of the alphabet. And so it's very interesting that even where language has its constructs and constraints, that we still find the opportunity to use it to express ourselves in a way that, blurs even borders. And so that's another thing we can draw inspiration from. And then a third thing I want us to think about is how sayings in different locales are used to bring people into the world of the person talking about a thing. But even in that sense of the word, while there's rules about what the color white can be and what it cannot be, there's still a lot of room, a lot of wiggle room to localize and bring people into your context. And in that sense, comparisons, are merely just an approximation. So I grew up at the equator. Sun rises at 6 a.m., sets at 6 p.m. So, bright as day makes sense to me. But where I am right now, there's people at the Arctic where the sun doesn't rise at all, right? And so saying to them, bright as stars, is a better expression, right? And so while there are rules about what bright can be, there's still a lot of wiggle room around the ways we express ourselves. And that's another thing we can bring into the way we think about API design and the ways we want it to scale into different locales. All right, and the last of my stories, I have many, but I'll limit it to that today, is a bit about language and spellings. This is a game I absolutely love, and you can be sure I spend 15 to 20 minutes every day playing. It's by the New York Times. It's called Spelling Bee. They give you 7 letters in hexagonal format, and there's a central letter that you have to use to construct your words. And the rules of the game are that you can only form words that have 4 letters or more. And you get to score high points, you get to genius level, you get to queen bee level. It's very interesting. But the one thing that constantly frustrates me about this game is essentially around the rules of language. There's American spellings and British spellings. Again, Kenya is a Commonwealth country, so British spellings is what we lean on, right? And so I always feel like I'm missing a point or two because, there's a missing U in American spellings of words like favorite. But it doesn't stop me from playing the game, right? And so the constraints here are more. The rules are tighter, but there's ways around it, and it doesn't stop me from playing the game. So as you think about how you design your API, the rules that you want people to stick to, give them a bit of wiggle room, right? But if you can't, that's okay. It's seldom means that people will stop using the thing that you have built. Oh, I said that was the last one. Oh, but this is definitely the last one. So WordPress did a thing that has, been adopted by many across technical industry. Over time, they coined this term a long time ago when they were introducing WordPress to the world. Coding is like poetry. And I keep wondering who in the team, came up with the term, and then I'm like, yes, that's it. Thank you to that person. But it is true, right? You look at how we start to learn how to code, right? You're taught how to think about things logically and turn that into language agnostic algorithms. So I just want my program to sum up 2 + 2 and give me 4. And then you start to think about the different languages that you bring in your algorithm into, right? And then that you have to abide by the different rules that are in these different programming languages. And those are so different, right? Depending on what language you're using. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of wiggle room for you to, write. You can write, you can write the program a million ways, arguably, and you'd still get the answer 4. And then you start to think about efficiency and things like the big O notation, and then the rules get stricter about what that means, right? But then there's still a lot of room for expression, and you'll find, I think I've seen people sell snippets of their code because of how pretty it looks and because of how much it reads like poetry, actually. They sell that as art, right? So that's something else all of us in the room can relate to, because this is where essentially we start, and then we start to think about APIs and writing those so that other developers can adopt them and use them in their own contexts to extend the services that we essentially want people to use. A big thank you to Ivan and to David, who came before me and essentially set the stage for my talk. And so David especially has covered the why of APIs quite a bit. And I just want to say that for a long time we've known imitation to be the finest form of flattery, but I think with APIs we can all agree we think about this differently, right? And so when we think about the why of APIs, there's all these things that we want people to achieve and to do, and so essentially developers or the users of our APIs are at the heart of the why for our APIs, and so we keep thinking about them as we design this, right? And so that essentially means that imitation can no longer be the finest form of flattery. Adoption of the APIs is the goal for whatever our business goals are, right? And so that's what we want at the end of the day. And so we have to keep designing our APIs in a way that they will scale and in the different environments that they will be used. And the truth is that when we are designing these APIs, we likely do not know all the contexts that they'll be used in. And so we have to just keep that in mind as we go. So I'll take a bit of a break and talk about the work that my team does and show you how we've essentially used this construct, thinking of APIs in a way that will scale for a long time to come, and the effect of that over time. So what Spotify for Developers is well, I'll tell you shortly, but first, it's my team manages Spotify for Developers, and so there's Ole, Alvaro, Josh, and I. We're a small team of 4 for now, but we're hiring more people. And so if you go to Spotify jobs, search for developer advocate, you'll find jobs over there. We'd love to hear from you. So what Spotify for Developers is, it's the one place where we open up all the APIs that we want developers to use to extend services to users and extend the Spotify experience to users around the world, right? And so there's all these APIs that people can, and libraries and SDKs and services that people can build on top of and achieve different things. And so what does that look like? What does empowering people to do the things we never imagined they could do look like? So one of the biggest projects I love is called Every Noise at Once. This person tapped into APIs and garnered, I think it's a little over 2,500 genres of music right now, and just put them out on a page. And so if you click on any one of these many genres, and I couldn't get all of them in one screen grab, then you're able to get a sampling of what music in that genre looks like. So it's just really interesting stuff. A lot of thought went into it, and the methodology is also listed on the site. Another example is a way for people to discover music. And so you'd essentially say, like you can see at the top, I want to listen to a specific genre of music while I'm doing a thing, and on this day of the week or this time of day, and essentially gives you hours long of playlists. You don't have to keep changing songs, and it's all new music. So it's a good way to discover music. And there's lots more. There's DJ. People have built apps to give people the DJ experience. You can host a party. You can join a party. It's really interesting. One of my favorites is this iPod.js for people who love to be nostalgic about this type of thing. So it's an app that allows you to experience music on Spotify as though you were using your iPod. And it has all the great things, including the games that you could play on it. So I quite like this one. And there's lots of others, right, that allow you to discover new music based on your listening experiences, but it will be music recommended to you that you've never listened to before. So I'm rushing through that because I want us to get to scaling best practices before time is up. So yeah, we've already talked about this in the previous session. And one of the big things that David said was API first is a really good approach to adopt in API design. And I love that it it hyper focuses on developers, right? Like you need to have them at the core of everything you're doing in designing and developing your API. And so we'll look at what that means because before you even develop your API, you have to think about them way before, and what does that look like? And modularity is a thing. I love this screen grab about standards because, I traveled here and had to buy one of these plugs. But then that's one of the big things, right? That when you're designing your APIs, you have to think about your end users. And so using specs like the Open API spec would be a really good thing to do. Just things that are known, right? Standards that are known so that people do not have to learn your system all the way from scratch, right? Before they start to adopt it and use it, because essentially you're creating roadblocks that people can't jump over. So use known standards. It's just good practice. And the other challenge, XKCD 927, not 927 one. 927 captures it well. If you set out to build your own standards, you have to be very careful because it's true. Usually you're starting from a challenge that, has not been resolved by existing standards, right? But the challenge then becomes that instead of unifying all the things you wanted to, usually you end up fragmenting things a bit more. So be careful about that. And then documentation is such a big part of API design and development. And I think the one challenge I've seen is that we almost always start it too late, right? So at what point do you think about documenting your API? Is it after your first stakeholder has used it and is asking you big questions? Or, is it at the point where you started to think about, we need an API to resolve this issue? And so documenting everything right from your first initial conversations with your team and then working your way through to development and documenting every process of it, and then deciding what bit of this documentation is just for internal use for giving our teams context and what part of it goes out externally. I'd argue the latter is a better way of doing it. Err on the side of too much documentation, then decide what goes where. It's never too early to start. All right. So scaling API best practices was the meat of my talk today. And so we're going to spend some bit of time here. So I want for us to think about API first approach to API design and the role that developers play in that, the people that will use your APIs and the people that they will be empowering by building the tools, the extensions that they will be essentially. So you have to know the developers that you're designing for, right? What are the needs that they have that you want to address? I know we rarely talk about things like persona profiles in the context of APIs, but it's about time we started, right? And so I'd argue that if your team doesn't have one, you need a user researcher as soon as possible, right? Just someone to help you think and talk to your stakeholders, potential ones, existing ones, and make persona profiles of them. Just things that will help you track why you made certain decisions at different points in time and the reasons why you've made updates over the seasons. And then grab your user stories, use them as a reference point, use them as checkpoints every time you're about to, make a major update from one version to the next. Does it still meet the needs against the user stories that you have? And a really good way to think about user stories is you can have them written out as I am a person in specific role looking to use a specific component in whatever API you're building so that I can achieve a thing, right? And that's just a really good way to keep checking yourself and checking that your API is relevant for the people that will use it. We jumped from 1 to 4, but that's fine. So this is 2. It's always a good day to learn more. Lots of us have been in the industry long. I've only been here for about 10 years. A couple of people have been here for 20 or 30. And so I wager that with time, it's easier for us to err on the wisdom of experience that we've had and forget to learn from others, right? And so it's always a good day to find a book, come to a conference like this, learn from people, understand trends, keep up with the tech as it evolves, because then you're able to keep developing relevant things, both from the perspective of the people that are going to use it, but also based on best practices that are in industry. And then, don't just stop at learning. Don't just stop at building excellent APIs and documenting them well for your user base. It's important that you find time to learn, find time to share what you are doing well, your best practices, so that others can borrow from them. This essentially end up becoming industry standards at some point. So it's important that we think about scaling in that way. And sometimes in our teams, it starts in these small ways where people who have had more experience are able to, talk about their horror stories in developing APIs and the decisions they've made over time, to talk about the challenges they're facing and how they overcame them, right? To have office hours and skill exchange sessions. And then at some point, you find that some of the things you're sharing are really cool, and also in a good place for you to be able to share with the rest of us outside of your teams and organizations. So do that. A team that has done this really well in the past is Stripe. They have Increment magazine, if you've heard about it. They have a specific issue on APIs. So things like that are really cool. And there's books that people have written that I think we've all seen or will chance upon throughout the conference. There's articles, there's talks from API days, things like that are really cool to do. And then don't just stop there. And I talked a bit about publishing, but this doesn't have to be externally or in physical print. It can also be blog posts, right? It can also be your internal digests, just things that people can use as a regular reference point. Because the common trend is that you'll build a thing, it's really cool. Or you'll use best practices and you know about them, and then when you go on leave or on break, then people are stuck. Or you even forget about them in the future. So just having a place to publish this internally or externally is just really good practice, just so you then use this as onboarding material. Use them as a reference point every so often when you have to build a new API. And so for anyone who didn't scan the code before, this is what was in there, just a playlist I made with my talk title. All right, and I think we are out of time. So I mentioned Spotify for developers. That's where you can find that and see the kinds of APIs, libraries, SDKs we have out there, and also the kind of things that people have built out of that. Thank you, everyone.